I want just to start by saying that this business of debating and defining the creative industries has a bit of a history to it. And the history, and I'm starting in the UK, by the way, because actually the creative industries stuff really has originated in the UK around, and interestingly, around the 1980s. And the theorist, Bourdieu, who many of you may know, if you don't, it's worth a read or two, then he actually talked about the cultural industries. And that is equally important to remember. So really in the UK, we've had agencies defining and redrawing boundaries for as long as I can remember. That's what the civil servants are very good at. And that's resulted really in cultural policy and practice turbulence from 1945 onwards. There's never been a time when it's been quiet. There's always been something going on. And it commenced with the Arts Council of Great Britain and how it defined the world. And that's quite important to remember, where the genesis of these things came from. And really, it's a pragmatic history. This annoys our continental partners because criticism of the UK is far too pragmatic and not theoretical enough. And we don't spend too much time talking about the theory. So, but the pragmatism is this, that really boundaries have been drawn and redrawn over the years, fundamentally, in my view, for the inclusion and exclusion of the public sector domain engaged in restrictive practice. It's all about restriction. Now, why is it about restriction? It's because there isn't enough money to go around. If there isn't enough money to go around, you've got to define the area in which you're going to operate. We have several UK operational definitions at the moment, okay? So that life is wonderfully complex. We run around the place talking about culture. I wonder who knows what culture means. The arts, heritage, creative industries. The latest hot one for us is creative economy. So we're all sort of busily trying to sort that one out. We've still got cultural industries. And then we have some other things that come from the statistical world, things like standard industrial classifications and standard occupational classifications. I put those in because they actually generate the data. Those definitions generate the data by which government makes decisions about industry. And then just to add to this complexity, there's a whole bunch of international ones as well. So I don't know whether you come across some of these, but there's content industries, which is what the Chinese are really interested in. Copyright industries, the Chinese are interested in that too. What a surprise. No surprise there then. And international standard occupational standards and standard industrial standards. So really, we've got, just for starters, a lot of different perspectives kicking around here. But what we've also not included so far are the non-departmental public bodies, in other words, the agencies of government that all have their definitions, and also the professional bodies and commercial associations, which all have theirs as well. So I just want to take England, not the United Kingdom, by the way, because we don't really have a United Kingdom as such anymore. We have home countries, so Wales is Wales, Scotland is Scotland, and Northern Ireland is Northern Ireland. And so I'm just looking at England. So just in England alone, we have all this lot mucking about. So each of these organizations here all have their own definition of the world. And they're not talking to each other about it either. Does this sound familiar? So we've got a wonderfully complex world. And you know the way they try and make them talk to each other, don't you? Partnerships, consortia, that kind of thing. Let's create a partnership, shall we? Put them all in a partnership. That'll work, won't it? They'll all talk to each other. They certainly never talk to each other about definition. Not to mention the plethora of sub-regional intermediaries funded. I've not even gone down to a local level. What I showed you there was what's happening at an English level. If you go down to a region or a sub-region, it gets more and more complicated because you get more activity and more activity with people talking less and less and less. Which leads to this fragmented evidential picture, and this is really the point I want to make. So there's no consistent definitional framework. Well, that's pretty bad news, actually. Unrelated data collection and studies, that's even worse. particularly as I work in a university, and you guys do too. Little comparative for people who are not in universities are trying to advocate, for example. This is a disaster. Little comparative data nationally and internationally. And that's really important to understand. To try and compare creative industries here in Boston with London, you can't do it. So how do you know if you're going to invest in the creative industries in Boston, how are you going to perform? Who are you going to measure yourself against? Which benchmark? Little comparative data. Gaps in national and regional data. So there's quite there's sort of attempts at collecting at national level. But when you disaggregate it down to say, what does it look like in Barnsley, in Yorkshire, where I come from, take this national stuff and really disaggregate it down. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It doesn't work. And then there's little understanding of cities. So that's quite important too. Cities are big generators of activity, and yet our actual understanding of cities is quite limited. And fundamentally, a lack of detail, which leads to these things. Unreliable data for management and policy decision making. So, okay, the economic development agencies have now decided, because the automotive industry is crap, that we're actually going to have creative industries. Well, fine, good choice, happy with that. But actually, where's the evidence? How are we going to actually measure the effectiveness and performance of the creative industries? At the moment, we can't do it. Unreliable comparative data, I made that point, but the real point here again is for evaluation and measuring. So, if there's going to be public and sector investment in something, it's got to be evaluated. So how are we evaluating it, with what, against what? And finally, weak and unconvincing and unreliable efficacy. So this is like building a house on sand. How many times have people in the arts, for example, done that, to my recollection? Over and over and over again. Made whacking great claims about their worlds, and then suddenly it all collapses because it's not built on anything reliable at all. So we need to start somewhere, and the new Labour definition in 1998, thereabouts, came out of a Demos think tank paper, Charles Ledbetter and Kate Oakley, and this is what they basically came up with, and I think this stands the test of time. So I'm going to pause a little here, because I think I'd like you to digest this, this particular definition. It does need just a little pause. Those activities which have their origin in individual creativity, skill and talent, which have a potential for wealth and job creation through the generation and exploitation of intellectual property. I think that stands the test of time. I think that is quite interesting. And we'll then just take it a stage further, which is, where do you find it then? If we're happy with that definition, where do you find it? Find it in these 13 subsectors, and this is actually in the UK, where there's enormous amount of debate. Because I actually know, for example, here, the software is included, and software is actually included just to make up the numbers. They won't admit it publicly, but privately they do. So there are some arguments here. And if you're in Australia, for example, they have a slightly different collection of subsectors that they would be interested in. But there are around about, I would suggest, 9 or possibly 10 subsectors are pretty consistent across all of the things I've looked at. So, for example, you find advertising, architecture, crafts, design of fashion, film, interactive pleasure, software, music, performing arts, and publishing, radio and television in most of the subsectors definitions that exist in most countries that are interested in this. So it's like a kind of core set of activities. But people land on some of the sexy ones and ignore some of the others. And the tendency at the moment is there's an awful lot of replication going on based on no evidence.